Welcome, Internet. Today we're going to be talking about the differences between classic autism and infantile psychosis. So before we begin, I need to be very clear on what I mean by both terms. Because as you're going to see throughout this video, there's been a lot of confusion between both notions. So what do I mean by classic autism or classical autism? Well, I mean very simply those people who are diagnosed or who could fit the criteria put forward by Kanner, which means that there are people who need more adaptations, that need more help in order to be able to individuate, to be able to live their lives. People that often have issues with communication, with interpersonal relationships, with change, and so on and so forth. Here, and I have to be very, very specific, I am not talking about the subtype of the higher functioning, i.e. Asperger's and intellectually gifted autistic people, or even like intellectually leveled autistic people. I'm talking about really about people who have much more needs. All right. Also, and I'm gonna stretch this, I am not using low-level functioning because I find it deeply insulting. So I'm not going to go that way. So for me, it's classic autism. All right. Now, coming to infantile psychosis. Infantile psychosis is this idea that in the mind, something triggered very early on, if not at birth, in which the individual has issues grasping reality, i.e. staying within the realm of the real world or the normally accepted real world. And also, and this is very important, it often comes with an intellectual disability. So right now we don't know if it's intellectual disability that helps the psychosis occur, or if on the contrary, psychosis means that the individual is not able to grasp educative content, to be able to achieve in terms of academia, read and write, and so on and so forth. So it's a bit of a chicken and egg situation, right? The idea is that there's both an intellectual disability and psychotic elements. These people can also have problems of communication, but it's not the same. So why am I bringing both of them up? Well, very simply, you have to know that a long time ago, both ideas were synonymous. You would use one interchangeably for the other. That both meant the same thing, because autistic people for a long time were considered to be psychotic, structurally, right? But now we've moved on to this. However, it doesn't mean that there is no such thing as infantile psychosis. I do think that there is something that akin to that, and that both are separate, but they're separate in very subtle ways. So what makes them different? Well, according to me, what makes them very different is two main phenomena. Behavioral things that are different, and activity that is very different for both. So let's start with the behavioral aspect of it. In infantile psychosis, there can be violence. There can be biting, hitting, scratching, but it's often because the individual feels persecuted, that they feel under attack, or that someone is going to hurt them. Therefore, they tend to lash onto the person before to be lashed onto. At least in their minds, this is how it works. It's attacked or be attacked, and they're attacking first to, subjectively to protect themselves. I should also stretch this is not necessarily correlated with reality. It's not because someone has hurt them, someone has insulted them. Sometimes it's something in their minds that triggers X wants to hurt me. X is evil. I have to hurt X before X hurts me. All right? So it's not necessarily that X has really done something, but X unfortunately is there, and perhaps maybe a look, a smile, a behavior in X triggered something in which the infantile psychotic individual felt that there was a lot of persecution, therefore they're going to lash out. In the case of autism, or classical autism, there can be violence as well. It does happen. But Here it's very different. Often the violence occurs for two reasons. The first reason is that they're trying to manifest something. For example, it's not rare that an autistic individual that doesn't have the ability to talk or cannot necessarily verbalize what they're experiencing. Therefore, they're going to hurt someone else so that the adult or the person in charge realizes that they are aching. For example, they might pinch someone in the stomach, and let's say another patient. They might pinch them in the stomach and do it repeatedly. And you might think on the surface that, well, this is an act of aggression. It's not necessarily an act of aggression. Sometimes it's because their own stomachs hurt, but they can't verbalize it. Therefore, they pinch someone else to show to the person what is happening, in hopes that they will understand what is happening for them. And therefore, aggression can be a way of showing what is happening. It can also be because the person feels invaded, that the distance might not be respected. For example, if you go too close to an autistic person, they might have anxieties that they will be merged with the individual. Therefore, they have to push them back. Sometimes also the violence can occur when there is change, because change for the classic autistic individual is something that's unpredictable, an unpredictability that they don't know how to handle. Therefore, they're going to sometimes have meltdowns because they don't know. And in those meltdowns, they can unfortunately hurt people. Sometimes, not always, of course. But during those moments, violence can occur. So here we see that violence can occur in both, but they have very different meanings in both. Now, coming to communication. Often in communication, infantile psychotic individuals might be very communicative, might be very, very chatty, and they might not have an issue in sharing what they feel, what they think, and also how they perceive things. Or they might be completely shut in, but there is no interaction. It then becomes completely a no-go zone. What we see often for autistic people, however, is that communication is often an issue, complicated, but there is often a tentative to try and communicate. They're not often completely walled off. There is something there, but they might not be able to verbalize it. Therefore, for example, drawing, painting, sculpting clay, all of these things can be a help for the autistic person to be able to verbalize or to do something or to try and create communication. Also, sometimes sign language can help for certain people that like it or enjoy it. Now, let's move on to maybe the most fundamental aspect of all of this, is that in infantile psychosis, there is the presence of delusions, i.e. moments where the person is convinced of something that isn't real. So, how does it manifest? Often, and contrary to, for example, schizophrenia, which is a teenagehood / early adulthood triggers, and then it happens during those phases of life, infantile psychosis is from the get-go. But the delusions are also quite different. In infantile psychosis, often they have a joyful aspect to them. For example, a patient might say to you that, "Oh, I really like you. I'm going to marry you." And when you're going to say, "No, you can't marry me. I'm your psychologist. I'm your therapist. This is not going to happen. It's okay. Now you're a prince. Now I'm going to marry you." And you're like, this doesn't work. No. I'm going to get the ring and I'll marry you. And you might think that this is a game. It isn't. The person is really convinced. When you say, "No, I'm not a prince," they're like, yes, you are a prince. And they might even get angry if you push against it. So there is a delusional aspect. However, the delusion does not really last during long periods of time. Like, for example, at the very next session, let's say a week after, the individual is not going to talk about what happened. It has gone. Now they're going to talk about the pizza they had yesterday and they want the chips today. And you can say, "But there's no chips," and there is going to be chips. And the delusion, in a way, is completely tied with the pleasure principle, i.e. the person wants something, therefore they're going to imagine it. And these examples can vary wildly, right? I mean, infantile psychosis are perhaps the most imaginative people when it comes to the pleasure seeking and fulfilling the pleasure principle with delusions. And it can be for anything, like, oh, I've married the president, to now I'm a rock star, and so on and so forth. It has a very, should I say, childlike aspect to it. Whereas in autism, there is no break from reality, not inherently. For example, the autistic people is not, if they, for example, fantasize, they're never going to show you that fantasy as something that's real. It's always like in their minds. And often they don't necessarily talk about their fantasies, but more what they've seen, what they've experienced. And they will, for example, share it with you on the prism of a special interest, i.e. they're going to talk for a long, long time about exactly what they like, how they like it, what happened, for example, during the TV show. Every detail is going to be shared, but it's important for their inner life to share those details. And they say a lot about the autistic individual, for those that can talk. For those that can't talk, often they might have stereotypies, i.e. they might talk without necessarily wanting to communicate. For example, they might repeat the same sentences. For example, if they've heard an ad that they like, they might repeat the ad completely in circles, right? All the time. In this form of communication, the aim isn't for you to respond to that. This is them talking to themselves in a way. Whereas in infantile psychosis, if they talk by themselves, they're not talking for themselves. What is happening is that they're talking to a hallucination. In a way, they're having a dialogue that we can't see, but they're having something with something else, i.e. we just don't see half of the conversation. Whereas autistic people, if they talk by themselves, they're not answering anything. And this is very evident when you ask them, well, you're talking to me? And they'll say, no, not talking to you. Are you talking to yourself? Yes. And they can sometimes tell you that, quite frankly. And in these cases, it's because their voice often is self-soothing. It's a bit like having a self-hug. It's something that contains them and makes them more at peace. Whereas infantile psychotics often are at peace with the delusions. Autistic people are often more at peace with self-soothing or rituals, which reassure them a lot. And fundamentally, both have very different reactions to change. For the autistic individual, it might be very hard to accept change because everything is like very precisely organized in their minds. That, for example, if I'm going into the office of the psychologist, this is how the books are going to be placed. This is how the plant is going to be placed. And this is how the lamp is going to be switched on or switched off, depending on the day. Everything is like mentally pre-prepared in a way. Whereas infantile psychotics, they don't mind change that much. For example, if you move a lamp, it's not going to even ask a question. Whereas for the autistic person, they might directly say, where's the lamp? Before even saying hello. And basically, it's the relation to change is very different in both of them. And I think that that's another like differentiation criteria. And last and foremost, perhaps also the nature of anxiety. In infantile psychosis, the nature of anxiety can be that of being destroyed. i.e. someone's going to hurt me, someone's going to destroy me. Which isn't the case in autism. In autism, it's more a fear of falling or a fear of losing one's structure, i.e. the body might like dissipate and they might be very afraid of that. And subjectively, you can see that through their creations and expressions. And for the for the infantile psychotic, you might see it through the delusions. In any case, both types of patients need, I think, as a psychologist, a lot of support, a lot of emotional connection, very differently, because autistic people need to respect a certain boundary. And you have to be very cautious with where you go, where you don't go. Infantile psychotics are often like the interpersonal aspect of it, so you can be more supportive. Of course, you should not give in to the delusion, not say, oh, I'm a prince, but say, on the contrary, that you feel that, yes, that they would like perhaps to have a partner or a friend, someone that they love. And just sometimes listening to the delusion is very helpful, as most people that take care of them will tend to cut off the delusion as soon as it comes. Like, oh no, don't talk about this, or we don't care. So sometimes just listening to it can be cathartic for them and helpful. So I hope you enjoyed this video. That's pretty much everything I had to say. If you have anything to add, feel free to do so in the comments, and I'll see you in the next one.